Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. It's an honor and a pleasure to host you all. I am thrilled to invite you to the first webinar of our International Veterinary Cannabis Alliance for the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. Today, we'll be addressing legal environment and challenges around the globe that veterinarians are facing. We're so thrilled to have 5 speakers with us from Latin America, the US, and Canada, who are going to be able to describe the situations with which they're working in and the challenges that they're facing as practicing cannabis medicine in veterinary environment. As medicinal cannabis gains popularity and acceptance worldwide, interest amongst veterinary professionals and pet-loving communities is also increasing at an exponential rate. The newly emerging discipline of veterinary cannabis medicine is rapidly growing, while the traditional institutes of higher learning and veterinary-specific scientific research communities are struggling to keep up. This gap in education and scientific evidence, combined with the slow-moving wheels of government regulation, have created a field that is extremely confusing and challenging to navigate. In order to assist veterinary practitioners around the world, this newly formed International Veterinary Cannabis Alliance is embarking on a series of roundtable discussions to help fill the current gaps in knowledge and expand our collective wisdom. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm thrilled to invite our first pioneers in this field and veterinarians who will be able to describe some of the issues that they're facing. We have Dr. Santiago Acosta, who's going to get us started today. One quick thing before we get going, I'll just add to all of our attendees visiting, if you can type your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, we'll address any questions after 5 presentations at the end. And if your question is related to one of the specific panelists, please include their names so that we can address it directly to them. Thank you.
Bueno, muy buen día para todos. La verdad que es un día muy importante para la medicina veterinaria cannabinoide en Latinoamérica, ¿ok? Tanto para mi colega Paula Lescano como para mí. Es un honor estar representando a nuestro continente junto a grandes exponentes el día de hoy, como son la doctora Patti, el doctor Gary, la doctora Sara, que para nosotros son unos referentes muy grandes. Y obviamente queremos agradecer a la Society of Cannabis Clinicians por crear este espacio.
So you're just coming through now, but not before.
Sorry?
Oh, please go on.
Can you hear me?
Sí, 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 sí.
Ok. Entonces, básicamente nosotros, al unirnos con este gran grupo de personas, lo que queremos es poder visibilizar el trabajo que llevamos en cada uno de nuestros contextos, porque uno de los grandes o de las grandes inquietudes, y por eso quisimos abordar en este primer seminario la parte legal, es porque es la gran barrera que tienen los médicos veterinarios hoy en día para iniciar la práctica del uso del cannabis. Entonces, la primera pregunta siempre es, ¿puedo formularle cannabis a mi animal? ¿De qué manera se lo puedo formular? ¿Ok? Entonces,
Santiago,
a eso vinimos el día de hoy.
Santiago, I'm going to stop you 1 second. I'm sorry, we're having an issue with the translation channel.
Santiago, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think the voice is overlapping between both.
Okay.
Se está cruzando las dos. No hay un canal dedicado.
Yo estoy escuchando a los dos traductores.
The English speaking panel is listening to the translation right now?
No, there's no English translation coming through.
If you choose the Spanish channel, you might hear the English translation.
Okay. So for everyone joining on the bottom right, let's try choosing this. Okay, let's try this, Santiago.
Dale.
Ok. Y bueno, y para todos los que nos están escuchando en habla hispana, recuerden en la parte de abajo, obviamente, activar la opción de español para poder escuchar la traducción de nuestros amigos. Entonces, básicamente, la idea de empezar con esta primera mesa redonda y tocando los temas legales es poder decirle a los médicos veterinarios y a las personas, existen ya unas herramientas legales, hacen falta muchas herramientas legales aún, y nosotros que día trabajamos en esto tenemos la capacidad de identificar cuáles podrían ser esas herramientas que nos hacen falta. Entonces, por nuestra parte, la doctora Paula Lescano y yo les vamos a hablar del contexto latinoamericano de la medicina veterinaria cannabinoide, presentándoles primero nuestra asociación. La Asociación de Medicina Veterinaria Cannabinoide de Latinoamérica, de la cual yo soy presidente, y la doctora Paula Lescano es la secretaria, es un grupo de personas, 8 países, somos médicos veterinarios, que encontramos en el cannabis medicinal una manera amigable de tratar a nuestros pacientes, pero también empezamos a encontrar una serie de barreras en este aspecto. Entonces, al asociarnos, lo que nosotros queremos es educar y sensibilizar a la sociedad y a los médicos veterinarios en torno al correcto uso adecuado de la planta de cannabis. ¿Okay? Nosotros tenemos 3 pilares básicos, 3 objetivos básicos, que son fomentar la educación, fomentar la investigación y fomentar la sensibilización social en torno del uso del cannabis medicinal en la medicina veterinaria. De esta forma, la AMBC Latam, la cual es nuestra sigla, ha emprendido el camino no solamente de abordar procesos académicos, como ya lo vamos a ver, sino en realidad nosotros queremos o propendemos trabajar por la liberación total de la planta. ¿Y esto qué quiere decir? No quiere decir que nos salimos, ¿ok?, de nuestra parte médica, al contrario. Creemos que cuando la planta se libere en su totalidad, vamos a tener menos barreras y vamos a poder trabajar de mejor manera en pro de nuestros pacientes. ¿Ok? Entonces, básicamente nuestros objetivos es abordar de una manera integral la medicina veterinaria cannabinoide para que nuestros pacientes puedan tener un acceso seguro e informado a la medicina canábica. Paula.
Bueno, Santi, muchas gracias. Agradecerles a todos. Agradecerles por la invitación. Estamos muy contentos de estar acá y poder debatir junto a todos los médicos veterinarios referentes a nivel mundial sobre esta temática. Bueno, mi nombre es Paula Lescano, soy médica veterinaria, vivo en Argentina, y formo parte de la Asociación Latinoamericana de Medicina Veterinaria Cannabinoide. Como decía Santiago, que es quien preside, tiene 3 pilares fundamentales nuestra asociación: un comité académico, educativo, la importancia que tiene de velar por el nivel educativo, hacer extensión junto a distintas instituciones, ya sea públicas, ya sea privadas, universidades públicas, facultades de ciencias veterinarias, en la cual podemos transmitir este tipo de educación de medicina veterinaria cannabinoide, un comité científico que vela por los estudios de investigación médico y científica, y este comité de sensibilización, que es un poco la actividad que estamos llevando adelante en este momento, sentarnos a debatir y observar las problemáticas que tenemos frente al acceso del uso terapéutico de la planta de cannabis en nuestros pacientes. Así que, bueno, hacer visible esta problemática, saber que los médicos veterinarios no solamente tenemos que luchar por la prescripción médica de cannabis para un tratamiento veterinario, sino también ayudar a las legislaciones vigentes que están hoy en día actuales, e ir incorporando el área veterinaria para que se logre el acceso. No sé, Santi, si querés empezar a comentar un poco qué pasa en Colombia con respecto a la ley de cannabis medicinal.
Ok, entonces, en Latinoamérica, en el año 2000, digamos, a mediados de la década de los 2000, llega el boom del cannabis medicinal, ¿ok? Y empiezan a liberarse contextos, primero fue Uruguay, etcétera, etcétera, ya le vamos a hablar de eso, pero en Colombia crearon una ley, se tomaron el tiempo de crear una ley bastante extensa que además de permitirnos el uso médico del cannabis, también nos permite ser productores, ¿ok? Entonces, hoy en día, en Colombia estamos en un país que además de tener la potestad en sus médicos y médicos veterinarios y odontólogos para poder prescribir, es algo que hay que resaltar de esta ley, que desde el principio incluyó a los médicos veterinarios, ¿ok? Les estoy hablando de la ley 1787 del 2016, y nos faculta para poder prescribir. Pero también sucede algo muy interesante. Al ser un país productor también, tenemos una gran ventaja en el área de la investigación. El contexto colombiano permite liderar investigaciones, ¿ok? Con la totalidad de la planta. ¿Esto qué quiere decir? Que a diferencia de otros contextos, un ejemplo, lo que son los estudios con tetrahidrocannabinol, se pueden llevar a cabo, se pueden hacer propuestas de diseño de fórmulas que contengan más del 1% de delta 9 tetrahidrocannabinol para animales. Entonces es algo que a nivel de investigación le da un fuerte, ¿ok? A este contexto. Y además de eso, hoy, al año 2021, ya tenemos una gran cantidad de empresas que están en su fase de producción. Como todos ustedes saben, crear medicamentos toma un tiempo para poder hacer sus debidos ensayos clínicos, etcétera, etcétera. Pero en Colombia, aunque hoy en día no tenemos un medicamento registrado a base de cannabis para animales, ya tenemos algunos adelantos, ¿ok? En investigaciones y sobre todo ya tenemos la formulación magistral como una primera herramienta para poder tener medicamentos seguros para nuestros pacientes. Ahora, Pau, por favor, cuéntanos, ¿qué está pasando en Argentina? Es muy importante el movimiento que están teniendo mediáticamente. Cuéntanos qué está pasando.
Bueno, bien, en Argentina el área veterinaria empieza a asomar dentro de las legislaciones, a nivel local más que nada. Tenemos que saber que Argentina tiene una ley a nivel nacional, la ley 27.350, que permite el uso y el acceso a medicamentos a base de cannabis, pero para uso humano. La herramienta por la cual muchos pacientes se mantienen tratamientos médicos es a través del autocultivo. La ley nacional argentina permite que los pacientes cultiven en sus casas, ¿sí? Para un tratamiento médico. Y por lo tanto, el profesional de la salud, el médico de humanos, es quien receta y quien da la indicación terapéutica. Si bien la ley argentina empezó a ampliar la mirada en muchos aspectos, hoy en día muchas personas con diferentes patologías pueden acceder a tratamientos con cannabis. Antes era solamente la epilepsia refractaria y antes solamente un neurólogo podía prescribir cannabis. Ahora ya eso se amplió. Cualquier médico de humano puede prescribir cannabis. Para eso hay un registro, ¿sí? A nivel nacional. Pero este registro no acepta las matrículas de los médicos veterinarios. Por lo tanto, la ley nacional argentina, los médicos veterinarios no tenemos competencias dentro de la misma para poder brindar acceso a nuestros pacientes, ¿sí? No quiere decir que en Argentina los médicos veterinarios no puedan prescribir cannabis, al contrario, no con la ley de cannabis medicinal, pero sí con la ley de psicotrópicos y estupefacientes que existe en Argentina. Los médicos veterinarios aparecen dentro de estos artículos de la ley, permitiendo la prescripción de sustancias que están fiscalizadas o están reguladas. Lo que está limitado con esta ley de psicotrópicos y estupefacientes es el acceso, porque el único acceso que tiene un animal al cannabis con ese tipo de ley de psicotrópicos y estupefacientes es un medicamento que es destinado solamente para uso humano, ¿sí? Y es inaccesible, o sea, el valor económico excede, ¿sí? O sea, como dice Santi, si bien Colombia, fíjense que la ley de Colombia sí brinda competencias al médico veterinario para poder prescribir, sigue faltando acceso a la sustancia, no hay registros a base de cannabis, pero esto no solo pasa en Colombia, en Argentina, sino a nivel mundial, no existen medicamentos registrados, así que estamos el acceso se sigue limitando. Nosotros, desde Argentina, se ha realizado un movimiento, porque también nos hemos unido, como dentro de la asociación que somos, a nivel latinoamericano, aquí en mi país, Argentina, hay muchos veterinarios canábicos argentinos que llevan adelante tratamientos médicos y también que dentro de sus localidades se acercan a los diputados, a quienes legislan, y empiezan a debatir o llevar a la mesa esto, qué pasa con los veterinarios en esta ley. Así que a nivel local sí están existiendo proyectos en los cuales la medicina veterinaria empieza a tener competencias. Se pueden llamar ordenanzas municipales. Aquí en Neuquén, provincia, también llevamos adelante, junto con mi compañero José Mazabó, que es otro médico veterinario activista de Argentina, un proyecto de ley a nivel provincial, ¿sí? Estamos intentando, si sale, es el primer proyecto en toda Argentina de provincial en el cual le brinda competencias a los veterinarios para su prescripción. Así que Argentina también está haciendo un auge importante en poder comunicar y llevar a debate esta temática. Nosotros estamos luchando para que a nivel nacional podamos entrar dentro del registro que tiene el programa de cannabis medicinal. O sea, que los médicos veterinarios podamos, a través de nuestras matrículas, ser aceptados y con esa indicación terapéutica o con esa inscripción, lograr que los tutores o las familias de animales puedan cultivar para generar el tratamiento y mantenerlo. Así que para eso hicimos una carta al presidente de la Nación y también al ministro de Salud para, bueno, comentar este vacío legal y, bueno, empezar a ampliar la mirada de saber que nuestros pacientes son animales y también son sujetos de derecho dentro de una ley. Así que, bueno, Argentina estamos en ese proceso.
Muy bien. Ahora, ¿qué queremos contarles? Hay otros países que también han legislado para cannabis en Latinoamérica. Por ejemplo, Uruguay fue el primer país que tuvo una legislación y es un caso único en el mundo porque ellos primero legalizaron el cannabis de uso adulto o recreativo y luego legalizaron el cannabis medicinal. Entonces, ¿qué destacamos de Uruguay en nuestro contexto? Que es uno de los pioneros a nivel mundial de la legalización del cannabis y tienen unos trabajos interesantes también ya a nivel investigativo y trabajando directamente con los pacientes, ¿ok? Brevemente también, ¿qué les podemos contar? Perdón, Pau. Que por ejemplo México tiene un perfil muy parecido al de Colombia. Ahora tienen una ley de productores y que les permite usar el cannabis medicinal. Tiene que volverse explícito que el médico veterinario puede prescribir cannabis, ¿ok? Al igual que pasa en otros contextos, ¿verdad, Pau?
Sí, sí. Mencionarles que dentro de los países latinoamericanos tenemos Colombia y Chile, que la ley de cannabis medicinal sí otorga competencias al médico para que pueda realizar una receta de cannabis, ¿sí? Es Chile y Colombia. El resto de los países, los veterinarios no pueden actuar en esa ley. Y bueno, la idea es, a través de estos debates e informándonos entre nosotros, buscar, como decía Santi, modelos y ver de qué manera podemos empezar a interactuar dentro de la ley existente, porque no hay que realizar una ley nueva de cannabis para animales o para el área veterinaria, sino lo ya existente, empezar a ver de qué manera podemos conveniar y relacionarnos, por supuesto.
Ok, y pues obviamente también aún tenemos contextos donde no es legal, ¿ok? En donde no se toca el tema. Nosotros tenemos representación de El Salvador en nuestra asociación. Tenemos un veterinario, un saludo, Coqui, y él es el único, digamos, que está hablando del tema y en el país de él no es legal. Digamos, para él sería un problema hablar abiertamente acerca del uso del cannabis en medicina veterinaria porque no tienen un sustento legal que los apoye, ¿ok? Entonces, en realidad, en Latinoamérica tenemos una gama, ¿ok? En cuanto a la legislación, porque tenemos países que incluyen a los veterinarios dentro de su ley de cannabis medicinal, porque tenemos países con leyes penal, pero que habla explícita, ¿ok? A los veterinarios, y tenemos países en los cuales todavía existe un gran prejuicio en torno al uso de la planta, ¿ok? Entonces digamos que un poco el resumen de nuestro contexto va en todo, pero tenemos...
¿Se cortó ahí también?
Yeah, I don't see his.
Yes, he
Yeah.
got frozen.
Santiago, are you with us?
¿Me escuchan?
Ah, there, you're back. Oh, I think he's experiencing some computer freezing.
¿Ya? ¿Estoy de nuevo? Sí. Sorry. Perdón. Entonces, básicamente, también una de las ideas de estar acá es debatir un poco sobre los usos del THC, ¿ok? Digamos que en realidad en el delta 9 tetrahidrocannabinol está esa molécula que nos limita, ¿ok? Que gracias a Harry Eislinger no la tienen vetada, ¿sí? Entonces digamos que ahí está el meollo del asunto. Por parte de América Latina, dependiendo del contexto, hay lugares donde vamos a poder prescribir con THC, en donde se van a poder producir medicamentos con THC, pero en este momento, a nivel de Latinoamérica, no existe un medicamento que tenga un registro oficial de un ente, sea un ministerio de salud, sea un gobierno, para que pueda ser utilizado. Entonces, nosotros vamos en esto, ¿ok? Tenemos leyes que nos están promoviendo inclusive el uso de esta molécula, que nos permiten investigarlo, pero nos falta poder llegar al desarrollo de ese primer medicamento con un registro sanitario que nos permita llevar a cabo nuestra práctica clínica. ¿Algo más que agregar, Pau?
No, creo que lo vamos a seguir abordando a medida que avancemos en la charla. Gracias.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Santiago and Dr. Paula. Thank you for sharing this in-depth situation. Your advocacy for animals and cannabis medicine is truly remarkable and is being felt throughout the world. We're so honored to have you here as we work together towards this mission. I also want to give a big thank you to CBD Pets Peru and Alvaro Malkin, who's joining us today. Thank you for being here with us and for sponsoring the translation of this event so that we can make this education available to all of our English and Spanish speaking colleagues. You can find more information about CBD Pets Peru on their Instagram at CBD Pets Peru or at CBD Life Peru. So thank you so much again. We really are looking forward to making this education seen throughout the world, and we want to continue having these discussions together. Next up, we have Dr. Sarah Silcox joining us from Canada. Dr. Sarah Silcox is a pioneer in the world of veterinary cannabis use and one of the founding directors and president of the Canadian Association of Veterinary Cannabinoid Medicine. Thank you, Dr. Silcox, for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. This is such a great group and so many people that have been working so hard to bring this issue to the forefront. The Canadian Association of Veterinary Cannabinoid Medicine was founded back in 2017, which was a year before Canada brought into effect our new cannabis legalization. So I know Santiago had mentioned Uruguay as being the very first country to legalize cannabis for both medical and non-medical use. But Canada's been doing a pretty good job at staying ahead of the curve with regards to cannabis legislation as well. Canada legalized hemp production at a federal level way back in 1998. But those hemp regulations were restricted to the production of seed and fiber. So it didn't allow the utilization of flowers and leaves or the extraction of cannabinoids. Really, that material was supposed to just be destroyed and turned back into the ground and harvest only seeds and fibers. In 2001, after a series of court cases brought to the court by patients requiring cannabis for medical relief, Canada legalized medical cannabis at a federal level. And those laws underwent a series of changes over the years. They started allowing patients to grow their own product or purchase product from a government grow and supply. Then it expanded in 2013 to allowing patients to purchase products directly from a licensed producer. And then patients fought to be able to grow their own. So again, more changes went on there. And then the most recent updates to the medical cannabis laws were in 2016. But in October of 2018, Canada put into effect full legalization of cannabis for both medical and non-medical or adult use or recreational use, whatever you want to call it. It allowed pretty much every adult Canadian to access a range of cannabis products through a legal pathway. But unlike what a lot of people, I think, expected that would look like, it still remains very highly regulated. So with the introduction of the Cannabis Act, some of the changes to hemp production included that they could now actually utilize the flowers and the leaves, and they could sell that portion of the plant to a licensed processor for extraction of cannabinoids. So that was great. It was a shame to see all of that product going to waste. But what's interesting is, unlike a lot of other countries that separate hemp derived CBD products from other cannabis plant products, Canada doesn't specify where the CBD comes from. CBD is CBD is CBD. So it's really any cannabinoid from the cannabis plant is all regulated the same. So you will find CBD isolates sitting on a shelf right next to THC products, all being regulated in the same way. And those regulations really come down to allowing a consumer to access legal cannabis through one of three different pathways. One is as a prescription drug. So that would be something like Sativex, or in the US, they have Epidiolex. Canada doesn't have that yet. And so those are pharmaceutical products that contain cannabinoids. And veterinarians can prescribe those as well if we see fit. I don't think many veterinarians are doing that simply because Sativex isn't necessarily a great starting product for a lot of our patients. Canadians can also access cannabis through that medical pathway that's been in effect for many years. And like other countries in Latin America and in the US, of course, that requires authorization of a physician, or in Canada, it can also be a nurse practitioner, but it does not include veterinarians. When those medical cannabis laws were written, it was because of the challenge of human patients. And so the laws were written with human patients in mind, and we kind of got left out of those. And then since 2018, Canadians can also purchase a range of cannabis products through that recreational or non-medical pathway. But again, that's still very regulated. It really allows them to purchase products either online or from a licensed retail shop through licensed providers. So sometimes that's government controlled, sometimes they're privately run organizations that have government oversight, but those are really the only three ways. You cannot legally purchase cannabis products, including hemp-derived cannabis products in the grocery store, at the health food store, at the gas station, at your pet store. That doesn't mean they're not available. Canada does have a very robust black market, and that includes products for both people and animals. And so what we find here is, certainly like pretty much everywhere else in the world, I think, veterinarians are being asked by their clients, you know, in some practices on a daily basis, about the potential use of cannabis. All adult Canadians now have access to cannabis products, but then that gap was where, well, what can we as veterinarians do to give them the proper information they need to do that responsibly? So when we founded back in 2017, what we really wanted to do was to be able to get veterinarians included with physicians and nurse practitioners under the medical cannabis pathways, because that means patients or clients have to come to us to get that information, to get the oversight, and we can follow them and we know what they're getting and we know what they're doing with it, versus them just going into a retail shop and purchasing products and getting their information from who knows where. That didn't occur. So now what ends up happening is we have a whole nation of pet families that are able to go out and legally access cannabis, but there was still this huge question as to what veterinarians could tell their clients when they had questions. And initially, when we started working with our veterinary associations and our regulatory bodies, the answer was, well, yes, if they ask, you can answer questions, you can talk about toxicity, but it stopped short of being able to provide information on specific products or on dosing. And so we worked really closely and we worked really hard. And we sort of highlighted the fact that when we're talking about harm reduction education, and we sort of framed everything under that umbrella, choosing the wrong product or giving the wrong dose are two of the biggest risks of cannabis use. And so in September of 2019, the Canadian Council of Veterinary Regulators put together a document of guidance for Canadian veterinarians that pretty much outlined some steps that veterinarians could take, including having discussions, discussing products, discussing dosing, in much the same way that we do many of our other extra label drug products or off-label drug products. So that was a big step forward. The language used was still very cautious. It was, you know, we could advise clients, we could advise upon. It stopped short of actually using the term recommendation. But just recently in May, our provincial organization, the College of Veterinarians of Ontario, put out some clarification where they actually use the term recommend. So veterinarians can recommend cannabis treatment, and then some guidance in terms of what to do. But where there's still a little bit of a gap is the recommendation can only be for products that are legally obtained, and they encourage us to recommend those products that are legally available through the recreational market. The medical products that are available are authorized by a physician and they're intended for the human patient. And so, you know, being aware of sort of the position that the physician is in, we don't want to divert that prescription, I guess, away from the human patient to the animal. In Canada, what we found is that although many of the products are similar, so we have dried flower, we have capsules, we have oils, we have topicals, you know, we have pre-rolled joints. So we have a whole range of different products that are available, and they're available on both the medical and non-medical side. The THC and CBD levels are quite similar, whether you're on the medical or the non-medical side. You can get a pure CBD product on the recreational side, and I'm guessing that's not for recreational use. I mean, no one's taking high CBD products for a fun Friday night. So a lot of people are still using that recreational pathway to access medical cannabis without having to go through their doctor. That's great as far as having products available, but the producers for the recreational side, we found are not always as open about what exactly is in the product. By law, Canadian producers are required to list THC and CBD, but they're not required to list anything else. They have to undergo testing for pesticides and heavy metals and residues, but oftentimes we have no idea what other cannabinoids are in there, what terpenes are in there, and it can change from batch to batch as well. While it's not always the case on the medical side, the medical producers, because they're much more patient focused, do tend to provide more information upon request, or sometimes directly on their website, with some of the other minor cannabinoids, with the predominant terpenes. And so we would still love to be under that medical pathway. I think one of the other challenges that we faced, and we often, chat about when we're discussing cannabis amongst colleagues, is we'll often send a client to a cannabis retailer to purchase their non-medical cannabis for medical use in their pet. And at those stores, they are prohibited from discussing the health effects of cannabis because it's supposed to be for recreational use only. And yet we'll send clients into the store and they will call us back and say, oh no, the guy at the store said I should never give any THC to my dog, that I'll kill my dog. Or, oh no, you can't use MCT oil, it has to be sunflower. I don't know where they're getting this information from. I had one worker tell me, and I called and introduced myself, and they actually said, oh no, no, you can't give THC. I said, you do realize I'm the veterinarian that recommended it? Oh yeah, no, that's wrong. There's only one product that you can use in pets. So we're having a real problem with the staffing at the retail stores. Whereas on the medical side, there is that availability of trained staff to answer consumer questions, to help provide guidance through product selection and appropriate use. So we've made a lot of headway, and it has been a big growth for us in Canada over the last couple of years. Now being able to access that cannabis products for our patients, to now have some clearer guidance in terms of what we can discuss with our clients. But we would definitely still like to have that access under the medical pathway, because really and truly we're medical professionals and that's where we should be included. There is some talk of a new classification of products in Canada. I know that there's an advisory board that's currently meeting to discuss the introduction of cannabis health products, which would be a bit of a hybrid between a cannabis product and a non-prescription drug. And so these would probably be low THC items. They could be combined with other non-prescription products, but because they're still cannabis, as it is proposed at this point, they would still only be available for purchase through one of the cannabis retailers or a medical provider. And that doesn't include veterinarians, it doesn't include pharmacies. So now we've got medical products being sold outside of a medical professional's oversight. So we're hoping that there may be some changes there. We're certainly advocating for some changes on that front as well. But we've come a long way. Sometimes it feels like we've been at this forever, but looking back, it's been 4 years. So I'm excited about what the next 5 or 10 years might bring. From a professional side, we've certainly seen a tremendous amount of growth and interest in the area. We've put on a couple full-day conferences on cannabinoid medicine and have pretty much been sold out at those events. We've given tons of lectures at conferences and small regional veterinary meetings, and the rooms are always full. So it's wonderful to see so many veterinarians wanting that information. And certainly when we speak at some of the vet schools, same thing, the students just can't get enough of that information. And I think they know that this is an area that they're going to get lots of questions on. So we'll keep doing that as well. I'm not sure, did I forget anything there? I think we Yeah, we don't have any products at this point specifically regulated and approved for pets. And so if we get those cannabis health products, those would be available for pets as well. But currently, all the products in the retail stores are intended for human consumption. So we're using them extra label like we would many of our human medications.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Silcox.
Yeah, let's see how the US compares.
Yes. Last but not least, we have Dr. Gary Richter and Dr. Patty Mayfield joining us from the US, from Oakland and from Oregon. Dr. Richter has been a veterinarian in the East Bay for 20 years. He's the owner and medical director of Montclair Veterinary Hospital and the Holistic Veterinary Care. By integrating medical cannabis with other conventional and alternative therapies, Dr. Richter has improved the quality and extended the life of pets living with medical conditions ranging from arthritis to inflammatory bowel disease to cancer. He published a book in 2017, The Ultimate Pet Health Guide, which does include a chapter on the use of cannabis for pets. And Dr. Patty Mayfield is the chair of the Advocacy Committee of the Veterinary Cannabis Society and is an active member of the American Veterinary Medical Association. She's the owner of Smiling Dog Veterinary Service and offers integrative medicine, mobile veterinary diagnostic ultrasound, emergency and critical care, and many other services. I look forward to hearing from both of them about how the situation is unfolding in the US. So I will pass the mic to Dr. Richter.
Well, hi, everybody. I am so happy to be here. It's so exciting, like an honest to God international panel to discuss veterinary cannabis. That in and of itself is a victory. So congratulations to everybody for that. It's also very interesting to hear all of the creative ways that our respective governments can find to make life difficult for veterinarians and pet owners. You would think that they sit at home and try and come up with these things on purpose. But let's talk about the situation in the United States. So that'll be a good sort of compare and contrast to what we've already heard. So for the listeners who are not in the United States, just a quick note. So there's really kind of two different sets of laws and regulations in the United States. There's federal law that covers the entire country, and then each individual state very frequently also has their own laws. And interestingly, those laws are sometimes at odds with one another. They don't necessarily agree, and that can create its own sort of interesting legal challenges. But this, the situation as it pertains to cannabis in the United States is, federally speaking, what the government would refer to as marijuana is illegal. So anything that contains more than 0.3% THC is considered marijuana, and that is federally illegal. Anything that is 0.3% THC or less is considered hemp, and that's a little bit more of a gray zone. In 2018, the government passed a law saying that it was legal to produce and transport hemp and hemp extracts. Interestingly, what they didn't say is they didn't say it was actually legal to sell these things as medicine or anything else. So while there is a very, very robust hemp-based CBD market in the United States, technically speaking, it's all illegal. But the government just sort of chooses not to enforce that aspect of the law, because number one, I think they know that change is coming, and number two, this is an enormous amount of money in the economy, and nobody really seems to want to excuse me, get in the way of that. So hemp-based products are readily available. Many of them are labeled specifically for pets. And as I think everybody on this panel is aware, there has been there has been some interesting and intriguing research that has come out looking at the use of CBD, usually hemp-based CBD products in dogs and cats. And I think we're getting down that road to where we have a greater understanding, at least from the research perspective, of what these products can be useful for. And that sort of leads me to kind of the state to state issue. There are states in the United States that have legalized cannabis in some form or another, either medical or recreational or both. And there are those that have not. For the ones that have legalized medical cannabis, or as the government would term it, marijuana, the specific laws about how those products are regulated and sold and who can do what with them are completely different from one state to the next. So for example, I live in California. In California, we've had medical cannabis since 1996. But unfortunately, when the laws were written back then, nobody really thought about veterinarians when they were describing the use of medical cannabis. So the laws very specifically refer to MDs, medical doctors, doctors for humans. And thus sort of veterinarians were kind of left out of the discussion. Therefore, years later, when medical cannabis for animals became sort of a front burner issue, something that people were really discussing and looking at, then all of a sudden there was this crisis because the Veterinary Medical Board in California told all of the veterinarians in the state that if you had any kind of discussion with a client about cannabis other than it's toxic, don't use it, they might come for our license. So effectively, they put veterinarians in an impossible position where we had to make a decision about, are we going to protect our livelihood and our profession, or are we going to protect our patients? And that was, that was a terrible spot to be put in, and that was really the launching point for an effort within the state of California to get the laws changed. And myself and quite a number of other people in the state started going to our veterinary medical board, started going to our legislators, and ultimately we did get legislation passed that allows veterinarians to, quote, discuss cannabis. It very specifically stops short of recommend, although to be honest with you, it's never been completely clear where discuss ends and recommend begins. It's a very sort of gray kind of area. So that in and of itself sort of speaks to the confusion and the lack of understanding that's still going on. We have been continuing to push forward to get veterinarians to not only be able to recommend cannabis, but have cannabis products for animals regulated and sold in the same way that medical products for people are sold, through dispensaries, monitored for content, regulated as far as what an appropriate dose would be, and to have them only be accessible to people with a veterinarian's recommendation. So in other words, that patient is under veterinary supervision. And this is for products that contain any significant amount of THC. Because as Sarah very correctly put it, there is an incredible amount of misunderstanding out there. And interestingly, although I will say that our problem is sometimes opposite. It sounds like in Canada, people at cannabis dispensaries are not permitted to discuss how to use these products for animals. In California, they discuss it freely, and they just give people really bad information. They just tell people all kinds of things that are not correct. I've had people walk into my office with literally a bag full of products that they purchased at the dispensary, and be completely confused by the things that they were told by the person at the dispensary. And as both myself and many other people have been telling our legislators and our veterinary board here, the fact that the only people in the state that can't recommend cannabis for animals are veterinarians is crazy. It endangers patients, and that's what we've been sort of continuing to move forward with, continuing to push back on. And I will say that over the past 5 or 6 years, we have made a lot of progress. We have gone from our veterinary board saying, absolutely no, this is never going to happen. In fact, at one point, the president of our veterinary board said during a meeting, I don't know much about cannabis, but I know it kills animals. And that was the kind of misunderstanding that we were up against. We have now progressed to a point where it's a much more nuanced discussion with the veterinary board about, okay, how are we going to do this and do this correctly? So that's been a really big change. All of a sudden there's a collaborative effort now rather than an adversarial one, and that's been very gratifying. Although, as I think everybody on this panel has experienced, the political process of getting any kind of law changed is to say the least complicated. I have received far more of an education in politics over the past 5 or 6 years than I ever wanted to have. And I have not been overjoyed with what I've learned, because, somehow ideas that start out as, we're going to do what's right for the animals and right for the veterinary profession gets twisted around by people with either political goals or financial goals. And you wind up with something that in no way resembles what you were trying to get done. And that's really something that we've been up against here in California is there have been financial interests that have been pushing to pass laws that would allow medical cannabis products for animals to be sold in recreational use dispensaries, meaning anybody over the age of 21 could go buy these products, with no veterinary supervision. The way the most recent law that they were trying to pass, which fortunately didn't pass, the way that law was written is those products that could be sold without any veterinary supervision, they would have a maximum of 10 milligrams of THC per dose. So think about what happens if somebody walks into a dispensary and buys a 10 milligram per dose cannabis product and gives it to a dog or a cat, particularly a small dog or a cat. Where that's going to end up. That's going to end up in the emergency room. And this is exactly the point, is you have people that are trying to make these laws and trying to make these decisions that do not have the patient's best interest in mind, and really don't have the veterinary profession's best interest in mind either. And that, that whole sort of amalgamation of all of these things is really what led to the formation of the Veterinary Cannabis Society. The Veterinary Cannabis Society is an organization of veterinarians and scientists and other interested parties that really was put together to do 3 things. The first one is educate veterinarians and educate pet owners about the safe and effective use of medical cannabis. The second one is to advocate, to go to both our state and our federal government and promote common sense legislation that protects animals, that protects pet owners, that protects veterinarians. So again, I mean, all we want to do is our job. All we want to do is just practice medicine and take care of our patients. It seems like such a simple thing, but of course it's not. And then the third thing that the Veterinary Cannabis Society is doing is we are working with producers and working with industry to make sure that the products that they're producing are produced properly, are labeled properly, are advertised properly, so that the consumer can have some confidence that they're getting a product that is going to be safe and effective for their animals. So, I mean, as everybody in this group knows, it's a big job. It's a job that's going to take a very long time to get from A to B with, but it's also a job that we are very, very happy and grateful to be doing. And just seeing the progress that has occurred in the past 5 or 6 years is incredibly encouraging. And just on a personal level, I'm so excited to be seeing all of the efforts now that are going on in other countries as well. You know, it feels like we've all been on some level fighting the same battle with slightly different rules. But you know, kind of we're all in this together, and you know, I'm very excited to be here with all of you. I'm sure that Patty has plenty to add, so I will let her do that.
Well, thanks, Gary. And yeah, I also just want to say how excited I am to be here. And I think that this is such a an important component of getting the message out. And I think that obviously everyone here is, we're all doing our part with that. And it's fantastic to see. But, you know, to kind of spin off some of the positive changes, because we could belabor how challenging it is to navigate all of these individual state statutes and laws, and not to mention international nuances within the regulations. But to kind of start with a positive note, I will say that in the United States, just in the last week, there was information that Nevada is the first state to allow veterinarians to not only discuss, but also to advise and recommend on dosages of hemp-derived CBD or cannabinoid products. So that news just dropped in the last week. And, you know, again, I think it goes to show how complex, you know, each of these individual state regulations are. And, you know, as Gary gave a really great overview of kind of the difference between federal and individual state statutes, obviously cannabis and hemp are almost in the United States considered two separate entities, even though cannabinoids, as Dr. Sarah said, cannabinoids are cannabinoids. It doesn't matter whether you obtain it from a plant that's producing THC greater than 0.3% or less than 0.3%. CBD is CBD is CBD. But in the United States, it matters very much whether or not it is from a definition hemp-derived cannabis plant or marijuana-derived. And again, with the federal farm bill in 2018 that went through, I think there's also a lot of confusion on that, in that it's federally legal, but as Gary alluded to, not in every state. So again, the individual states have these specific regulations. And for example, the state of Idaho, which is the state directly east of Oregon, where I live, CBD and all marijuana products are considered illegal. So even if you're shipping a CBD product, say you have, you know, plant product that's been processed and is shipping through the state, they can seize it and, you know, obtain it on the fact that it's illegal in their state to even possess or ship. So, you know, to have all of those complications just on the human sector of processing, of manufacturing, of growing into human products for medicinal or recreational use, veterinarians, as Dr. Richter had said, aren't even really considered in the human healthcare or healthcare portion. So we're kind of an afterthought when it comes to these products. And in the state of Oregon, CBD is actually not in violation of the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetics Act. So federally, they would say CBD could not be placed into food or beverage or drug additives, or like a supplement. But Oregon State doesn't recognize CBD as an adulterant. So if you go into the grocery store in Oregon, there's CBD in beverages, there's CBD in food products. They're sold at the gas station. And so this, again, highlights the problem that we have as veterinarians, and that you have clients who are picking up CBD products in gummies or, you know, in compressed pet treats that they get at the front counter of the gas station. So it lends to the difficulties that we have as practitioners trying to, you know, guide and counsel our clients on appropriate use. Not to mention harm reduction discussion, because again, as Gary has alluded to, I think within the veterinary community, we've gone from a shift of marijuana and potentially CBD products are only toxic, which is still kind of prevalent bias that I see, especially in the emergency room. But we can find some potential risks of CBD products or marijuana products if they're not grown properly. And again, when it comes to the CBD space, you know, COAs or certificate of analyses are always recommended, but they're not necessary in these products. So you don't know if there's heavy metals or pesticides that have been used. And so you have clients who are purchasing products that may indeed have some potential toxic principles that we're unaware of. So it's such a challenging landscape to try to navigate. And again, as you shift from state to state, you have such varying regulations that it's just impossible to keep up. And we'll say that it's I think encouraging to see states like Nevada. Michigan did just pass some legislation this year that does allow for veterinarians to discuss. In the state of Oregon, the Veterinary Medical Board has taken the stance that it's a more of a First Amendment issue, so that they're not going to interfere with your ability to discuss, and they will not impose any disciplinary action unless there is a specific complaint brought forth on a licensee or a veterinarian, or if there's federal action, like a felony offense on a licensee, then they will come forth and look at disciplinary action. But it's one of those scenarios where I think individual veterinary medical boards are hesitant to kind of push out on their own and make their own new recommendations on regulations. So again, to kind of focus on some of the positive aspects, just in the last year, we've seen the American Association of Veterinary State Boards kind of take the initiative to draft some guidance framework for individual states regarding discussion, potential use or administration. And while they don't have a final guidance recommendations in place, their initial draft was encouraging. Despite their not having exact definitions of CBD down correct, and obvious kind of gaps in their overall understanding of cannabinoid medicine, it does seem that the message for what they may release here soon is that CBD and or cannabis products, marijuana products, might be in the forefront of the ability to advise and even kind of work into the treatment plan. So there is some language there that is, I think, encouraging that within the veterinary space, if we can remove some of the fear of disciplinary action for some of these veterinarians, I think that we're going to see an overwhelming desire of many practitioners to enter this space. And my gut feeling is that it's already happening. If you were to go behind the closed doors of each hospital or clinic, or especially in integrative medicine and the holistic space, it's already happening. It's just that these practitioners have decided to put patients first over the fear of disciplinary action. And so, obviously, as we get more individuals involved and learn more about cannabinoid medicine and take the fear of disciplinary action away, I think we're going to see improvement in the field, in research, and in appropriate use. So again, I think I second everyone's discussion of how frustrating this is, but overall, I'm optimistic. When you have organizations like the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, which is a major advocacy group for cannabis reform here in the United States, they're reaching out to us at the Veterinary Cannabis Society and wanting to work with us on specific state laws that will allow for veterinarians to be included in the definition of practitioners who can dispense and recommend and prescribe cannabis. So we have some of those motions, in the early action, but I think it's going to be one of those scenarios where, again, in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm really curious to see where this is going to go. In the hemp space itself, you have advocates for changing the definition of hemp and marijuana once again. So there's movement now to change it from a 0.3% to a 1% THC. And, one of the attorneys who was involved in the Federal Farm Bill of 2018 is really championing that, just to try to have more international kind of a set platform for what the definitions are. So again, I'm just excited to be a part of this. I'm excited to see where it's going to go. And I think in the interim, if we can try to change some of the the bias on THC and whether or not it's a poison or a toxin, which it is not. It's an intoxication that we see in dogs. So just even reframing some of the terminology of how we work with this product, I think is key. But it's all about education, exposure, and continued advocacy. So I'm just thrilled that we're all here. I'm really grateful to the Society of Cannabis Clinicians for hosting this and including veterinarians as healthcare providers, because we are doctors of many species. So it's nice to be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner, Dr. Mayfield. That was fantastic to hear what's unfolding in the U.S. And after we've heard about what's going on in the rest of the world. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all to our audience members for attending. And I just do want to remind everyone that, SCC is absolutely open to veterinarians, and we do want to start to do more veterinarian events. It's such an important part. Like you said, so many beings are also suffering and could really benefit from medical cannabis. So thank you all for pioneering this work, for helping us bring this alliance together. And this is the first of many webinars. So we're addressing the legal environment today, but we've already drafted some other topics that we want to address in future webinars. So thank you all. I do want to remind everyone we have the Q&A chat open. We don't have any questions yet, so we can keep the discussion going between the panelists. But if you have questions at any time, put them in and we'll be sure to address them. And Santiago, I saw your hand up, so please take it away.
Sí, tuve como varias reflexiones escuchando a los colegas, ¿ok? Y yo quiero que los colegas, o sea, los veterinarios que aún no tienen las herramientas suficientes, partan de esto para que entiendan qué sucede. Primero que todo, como lo dijo la doctora Patti, hay que vencer un poco el miedo. Y eso se hace un poco desde el activismo. Los que trabajamos en esto no solo somos médicos veterinarios, somos activistas. ¿En qué sentido? En que muchas veces la industria farmacéutica choca con lo que necesita el paciente, ¿ok? El cannabis medicinal es algo netamente político y económico como industria. ¿Cuál es la labor de nosotros, de los científicos que trabajamos en esto? Velar porque esas leyes y esos intereses económicos vayan de acuerdo con lo que necesitamos para nuestros pacientes, ¿ok? Entonces, yo creo que tanto en Canadá como en Estados Unidos, como en Latinoamérica, los veterinarios que trabajamos en esto, además de exigir que nos tengan en cuenta para poder hacerlo, también tenemos que estar pendientes que esos intereses políticos y económicos concuerden con los intereses de nuestros pacientes. Entonces, es una labor ardua, ¿ok? Porque ustedes saben que el poder económico es muy grande. Nosotros tenemos que convencerlos a ellos. ¿Con qué? Con investigación, con educación, ¿ok? Demostrando la calidad de vida que se le da a los pacientes día a día con nuestro trabajo. Entonces el llamado es a que más médicos veterinarios no solo se unan al interés de saber qué pasa con los receptores y con los cannabinoides, que es muy importante, sino también entiendan que esto es una causa, ¿ok? Es una causa que amerita como poner nuestra energía aquí, porque finalmente tenemos que tener productos de calidad y certificados y a un precio asequible para nuestros pacientes, ¿ok? Para poder tener una terapéutica adecuada.
Maybe just before we jump into the questions, when Gary and Patty were talking, I was reminded of how grateful I am that here in Canada, our laws for the most part are set at a federal level. Each province can tweak it a little bit. Quebec has, different rules in Ontario when it comes to home production, and Manitoba is slightly different. But as a general rule, our laws come at a federal level. And we have also been so fortunate to have the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association on board with the same position that we're coming from, that we need to be able to discuss, that we need to have warning labels on products for pets, and that we need to have access to that medical pathway. So we haven't had any pushback from the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association like you guys may have with the American Animal Hospital Association and the AVMA as well. But you know, we still have work to do, but those are two hurdles that I'm really grateful for. I see in the chat there's a question about are retailers in Canada separate from medical versus recreational, or do both consumer groups use the same dispensaries to find their products? And so the answer to that is the medical and recreational are separate. There are companies who are producing products for both pathways, but consumers access them through different means. On the medical side, a medical producer or provider is licensed by the federal government. They keep all of the medical authorization documents on file. So all of the physician authorization is kept on file, and you order directly from that licensed provider and they ship it directly to your home. On the recreational side, you can purchase online or go into a retail shop, and there's nothing other than, you know, showing proof of age required for those. So they're oftentimes the products are similar. The products may come from the same company, but they're being sold through two distinct pathways. And in Canada, all products sold under the legal pathways are required to undergo third-party laboratory testing. So they're tested for THC and CBD, both actual and potential. So it includes the acidic forms there as well. And then they're required to test for contaminants like heavy metals and solvents and pesticides and mycotoxins and things like that. So, you know, those we can optimistically presume they have all passed. We don't necessarily need the COA to see the safety side of things from contaminants, although some people will argue that laboratory testing is still not as consistent as where we'd like it to be. So we sort of take them at face value for what that's worth.
I have a quick question for Santiago and Paula. I'm just wondering, how are cannabis products sold in your countries, and are you allowed to sell those products out of your veterinary office?
Gary, mira, acá en Argentina nosotros no tenemos productos medicamentosos a base de cannabis para el área veterinaria, no existen. O sea, nosotros dependemos sí o sí del abastecimiento de cultivadores solidarios, o si no la propia familia del animal que cultiva plantas, o sea, tiene plantas en su casa y con eso realiza fitopreparados artesanales. Por el momento es eso, no hay nada regulado en el área veterinaria. Para el lado humano, ¿sí? La ley de cannabis medicinal no solo permite el autocultivo a la persona, sino que las farmacias venden productos medicamentosos a base de cannabis autorizados por las entidades medicamentosas y los cubren la obra social de la persona, ¿sí? Si vos no tenés obra social, sale más de 60.000 pesos a argentinos acá un producto medicamentoso a base de cannabis. Pero sí hay productos medicamentosos para humanos, no para animales. Lo que transmitía yo con la ley de psicotrópicos y estupefacientes, que el médico veterinario puede prescribir a través de esa ley un aceite específico de cannabis, pero el acceso no existe. No hay acceso de la sustancia para el área veterinaria. Nos tenemos que adaptar al producto de farmacia destinado a humanos, ¿sí? No para medicina veterinaria.
En Colombia es legal el uso del cannabis desde el 2016, pero las comunidades indígenas, a raíz del mercado negro, de vender cannabis para el consumo recreativo en mercado negro, empezaron a desarrollar productos medicinales también desde tiempo atrás de que existiera una legislación. Ahora con la legislación, aún hoy en día, seguimos encontrando productos que venden desde la calle hasta que ya tienen una formulación magistral. Eso es un gran problema porque no existe una cuantificación, ¿ok? Las personas lo pueden comprar sin ningún tipo de prescripción. Entonces, la ley está siendo más fuerte con esto, pero a su vez está extendiendo herramientas. Nosotros caímos, como médico, yo caí en utilizar productos que se crearon con otro fin para poder tener alivio en mis pacientes. Por ejemplo, los cosméticos o los suplementos dietarios, ¿sí? Personalmente, no debe ser la vía. ¿Por qué? Porque un cosmético es un cosmético, un suplemento es un suplemento, pero en un contexto en el que no hay un medicamento legal, por lo menos tengo un certificado como cosmético que tiene unas buenas prácticas de elaboración, no como un medicamento, ¿ok? Pero puede ser una ayuda, eso por un lado. Y finalmente, el ente encargado de regular en Colombia, yo he podido servir de marco de referencia para la legislación de fórmulas magistrales. Ya tenemos un primer paso para poder utilizar más del 1% de THC. ¿Por qué? Porque los cosméticos que yo uso con mis pacientes tienen el 1% por debajo del THC. Con las formulaciones magistrales voy a poder prescribir cosas que contengan niveles más elevados de THC y puedo asociar terpenos y flavonoides. Entonces estamos a portas, estamos prontos a tener una legislación de fórmulas magistrales en medicina veterinaria.
Okay. Thank you for that that explanation. That was really helpful.
Thank you. There's a related question that came through about how are homemade products controlled, dose, ratios, chemotyping when available for veterinarians. Are veterinarians in some of your countries actually prescribing homemade products or recommending this? And are you recommending any ways to control the products that are being created?
Nosotros desde aquí, Argentina, en el consultorio veterinario de cannabis, realizamos recetas magistrales para indicar al paciente un tratamiento, ¿sí? Esa receta magistral es como una receta de cocina que explicamos qué dilución va a tener el preparado, qué cannabinoide va a predominar, ¿sí? Como trabajamos ya con cultivadores conocidos y de confianza, ellos tienen cromatografía de los aceites que elaboran. La cromatografía es el estudio que se le hace al producto para saber qué cantidad de THC, qué cantidad de CBD contiene el preparado. Nuestra receta no tiene un valor legal por el momento, nosotros lo utilizamos para que el tutor del animal vaya al cultivador y el cultivador le realice lo que dice la receta. Por el momento no tiene valor legal la receta nuestra. Nosotros trabajamos con formulaciones por lo general o diluciones de aceite de cannabis al 1%, que es 1 gramo de resina diluido en 100 mililitros de aceite, vehículo aceitoso, aceite de oliva o aceite de coco se utiliza. Siempre utilizamos al 1% por lo general.
I think here in Canada, there would be nothing that would prohibit a veterinarian from providing guidance to make a homemade product, because in most provinces, home cultivation is permitted. Under the Cannabis Act, every household can grow a limited number of plants. Here in Ontario, it's 4 plants per household. And with medical authorization, oftentimes families are able to cultivate much larger numbers. And so it's still a legally accessible cannabis product. But where we run into problems, of course, is we don't necessarily know what's in our clients' plants, what the cannabinoid concentration is. We don't have that oversight in terms of how it's being produced. The laws do restrict the type of solvents that can be used at home if you're making your own thing, but maybe people are just making canna butter or more of a tincture based using dried flower. And so those would be permitted, but then it becomes tough for the veterinarian because we don't know what we're advising on. I don't know how many milligrams of anything are in that product. And I have had some clients who have used homemade products, and it's just based on their reports of the effect of how they perceived that product. Oh, it was very high, it was very indica-like. And then we just worked with the go slow, or start low, go slow, and used a really high dilution rate and then worked up gradually based on response. But it has certainly been much easier when we now have products legally accessible that are already screened for a lot of those contaminants, and where we know the actual, at least the THC and CBD concentrations for dosing.
I think I'd like to say on that note, you know, it's very similar scenario here in the States, in that I've had clients that have home prepared products. Again, I try to avoid a true tincture because it's an alcohol base. And so if we can avoid that in dogs and cats, that's ideal. But unless we have a certificate of analysis on whatever batch they've prepared, it's absolutely, as Dr. Silcox stated, we just have no idea what we're actually recommending or advising upon as far as a dosage. And again, I think it's very fascinating just in cannabinoid medicine in general, in that we probably need to move away a little bit from a specific dose in patients, because endocannabinoid tone is always fluctuating and it depends on what we're treating. So I think that alludes to the nuance of actually, if we're ever legally authorized to recommend, advise, prescribe, dispense, this is not just simple textbook medicine in that it's 0.5 mg per kg twice a day for the rest of your life. You know, it's going to fluctuate and adjust depending on which disorder you're treating, and again, which specific cannabinoid, you know, profile you're looking for, where CBD might be helpful, but you might need some of the CBDA. CBG has some promise in some of the early, you know, studies. There's so many different cannabinoids that we could be evaluating. So, you know, to kind of circle back to the question, how do we control these? There's really no control on our end. All we can ask for is a COA, and if someone has done a home preparation, I advise that they submit it to a lab so they can see what they're actually administering. As far as in the States, there are no animal approved FDA, CBD, or marijuana drugs. And the FDA looks at, on the human side of things, a drug, a dietary supplement, or a food product, whereas in the Center for Veterinary Medicine within the Food and Drug Administration, there is no dietary supplement classification. So it's either a drug or a food source for animals. And currently, cannabinoids are considered drugs in the animal market because there's been research on them. So there's no drugs that are approved whatsoever. We can use things like Epidiolex or Sativex or Dronabinol off-label, as again, Dr. Silcox stated earlier, but those are often cost prohibitive. You know, our clients are unable to afford Epidiolex most of the time.
If I could just add one last thing to that, I mean, as far as homemade preparations, you know, I use a lot of herbal medicines in my practice, and certainly by definition, cannabis is an herbal medicine. However, when we look at how it works and how dramatically it affects physiology, I tend to think of cannabis also kind of like a pharmaceutical, because that's sort of how it functions. And I can't think of any other pharmaceutical that either number one is at the same time as a pharmaceutical and a recreational substance. And I also can't think of another pharmaceutical that people can make at home. You know, so if a client were to tell me, oh, I have a way to make amoxicillin in my bathroom at home, is it okay if I just use that? Clearly the answer is going to be no. And while obviously, you know, growing cannabis at home is fine, and using it recreationally is fine, and even potentially using it medicinally as a human, where you can regulate your dose based on how you feel, is also fine. But giving a product that is ultimately untested and unknown as far as you know, cannabinoid and terpene content, I mean, to me, that's just, at that point, it's just not really medicine anymore. It's just a guess.
Thank you. Another question here. Do we need to be concerned with the reuptake of Coumadin in animals if using large quantities of cannabis before surgery?
I guess I would question I suppose I'm not aware of Coumadin reuptake associated with cannabis. Coumadin is a blood thinner, which if a patient is on any type of blood thinner, warfarin, Coumadin, anything that's going to inhibit platelet function at the perioperative period, then that is very concerning. But I suppose I don't know what the link is between cannabis and Coumadin. I'm sorry.
I'm also, I mean, at least just from my scope of practice, I've never seen an animal on Coumadin as like a prescription. So yeah, honestly, it's not something I've ever really thought about.
I'm wondering if it may have to do more with cytochrome P450 inhibition. And so if they were on blood thinners for whatever reason, and then were started on cannabis, that may increase their blood levels. I know, I seem to recall looking into it once for one of my parents and being a little bit concerned about the potential for things to change and just need for, I mean, the easy way around that is just to do some clotting tests prior to surgery.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question, are there any applications for Delta-8 and other cannabinoids like CBG, CBN, CBDA, THC, and similar in veterinary medicine that have been proven?
Ooh. Ha, that last part was the nut to that question. that has been proven. So I think the answer to the, if I'm answering honestly, I think the answer is no, because we don't have that research. However, I think that there is every expectation and every indication based on the preclinical research and some of the other things that have been done in people, that things like Delta-8, CBG, CBC, the various cannabinoid acids have enormous medical benefit in both veterinary and human medicine. But yeah, I mean, that little qualifier at the end of the question requires it to be answered as a no.
Unless, of course, you have pet mice, because then I think there's enough laboratory data out there in mice, rats, guinea pigs that have looked at some of the minor cannabinoids as being potential. Yeah, and there was the one study, we just had our chat room last night and we were talking about topicals and transdermals. And so the one study that has come out looking at absorption of transdermals showed that both CBDA and THCA appeared to have better absorption transdermally than the decarboxylated forms. So that doesn't speak to efficacy for anything or a role, but certainly that there may be more of a role for those in transdermal applications if we can get to that point.
Nosotros, Sara, hablando de esto, aquí en consultorio, si bien tampoco sé que no hay trabajos de investigación, pero nosotros utilizamos mucho las pomadas o ungüento de cannabis en estado ácido para problemas de piel. Y hemos visto resultados fantásticos en acelerar la cicatrización. Hay muy buenos casos clínicos con el uso de pomadas, así que sí, hemos tenido experiencia.
Y bueno, finalmente somos médicos y tenemos que utilizar la ciencia pues basada en la evidencia, ¿ok? Pero también la historia de la humanidad, también la historia natural nos lo ha dicho. Todo la humanidad
cortó.
Ácidas son las que se han utilizado en alcoholes para tratar dolencias, ¿sí? Digamos, las abuelas, siempre acá, por ejemplo, en Colombia y en Latinoamérica, las abuelas siempre tienen un cogollo, una flor de cannabis, entre una botella de alcohol, y cuando les duele el hombro o cuando les duele la rodilla se lo ponen. Entonces yo creo que ahí está el gran reto, en nosotros llevar a la evidencia científica lo que sabemos que ha acompañado a la humanidad desde siempre. Ahora, cabe resaltar, y aprovechando que estamos acá, hace 2 días se pronunció la Federación Europea de Médicos Veterinarios con respecto al uso del cannabis. Eso es algo pues muy importante porque aunque dicen lo que sabemos, aunque dicen que faltan estudios concluyentes, por lo menos ya abren, un poco la visión en general de los médicos veterinarios en Europa al hacer esta federación, este pronunciamiento. Entonces creo que realmente vamos por buen camino.
Absolutely. And Santiago, that's a great lead into the next question we have here. If anyone is familiar with the status of veterinary cannabis products and recommendations in Europe, could speak a little bit to the situation that's unfolding here in Europe as well.
I have a little bit of knowledge in that regards, in so much as my understanding of the way that it works in the UK and the EU is that the veterinary medical directorate is within their purview to approve a cannabis product, which would allow veterinarians to recommend that product. But it's also my understanding that there are not currently any products that have received approval, and I believe that is true for both sort of medical marijuana, legally speaking, as well as hemp-based products. I do know that there's at least one group in the UK that is applying for that kind of approval to allow veterinarians to be able to recommend. But I mean, as of now, my understanding is that there's nothing that a veterinarian can do legally, but I also think that similarly to probably all of our countries, many of these products are available and people are giving them anyway, but just not necessarily with the kind of veterinary guidance that would be ideal.
Wonderful. Let's see, we have one last question here. Thank you so much to all the panelists and the attendees for hanging in here with us. This has been a really wonderful and insightful discussion. A question from Brazil. As veterinary medicine here in Brazil is integrating a new law, 399/2015, which is underway, which would give the right to Brazilian veterinarians to prescribe to their patients. A little question about how this process went in your own countries. I know we had a discussion about this earlier, but as a great closing question, what kind of advice can you give to veterinarians in Brazil and around the world, for that matter, who are fighting for this right to prescribe cannabis to animals?
Pues, ¿puedo empezar?
Go ahead.
Pues primero, que busquen a los colegas los conceptos técnicos y científicos y en apoyar todas estas legislaciones. Entonces, un primer paso es buscar a esos grupos de personas. Segundo, como dijo la doctora Patti, que se me hace lo más importante, es no tener miedo. Saquémonos la idea prohibicionista de la cabeza, ¿ok? Nosotros no estamos drogando a nuestros pacientes, no los estamos poniendo en riesgo si estudiamos, si aprendemos de las bases científicas que ya hay, ¿ok? Entonces también es como, a ver, nosotros como veterinarios dijimos, vamos a llevarle a nuestro paciente todas las opciones terapéuticas que sepamos nosotros que sirven. Entonces, si empezamos a entender que el cannabis es una opción terapéutica, ¿por qué no recomendarla? ¿Ok? Entonces, busquen a estas personas, déjense apoyar, déjense guiar en la parte legal. Siempre vamos a estar dispuestos a explicarles qué pueden hacer, qué no pueden hacer, ¿ok? Y de repente podríamos también ayudarles en la elección de medicamentos, en la elección de protocolos. Entonces es simplemente toquen las puertas, que yo sé que tanto en Estados Unidos con el doctor Richard y la doctora Patty, tanto en Canadá con la doctora Sari, como en Latinoamérica con nosotros, van a encontrar ese apoyo que necesitan.
Sí, me sumo a lo que dice Santiago, ¿sí? Poder unirse entre todos los profesionales de salud, los médicos veterinarios, golpear las puertas a los legisladores, ir a llevar a debate la situación, la problemática, y bueno, estar a disposición y también tener fundamentos de por qué cannabis sí en animales, o por qué sí los médicos veterinarios deben poder prescribir cannabis, ¿sí? Nosotros, por ejemplo, desde aquí Argentina, de la mano de abogadas que trabajan en el área de derecho animal, nos ayudaron a redactar un dictamen, ¿sí?, para los legisladores. En ese dictamen es como que se explica y se fundamenta de por qué el animal es un sujeto de derecho también, porque estamos abordando una temática de derecho a la salud. Así que los dictámenes también funcionan.
In Canada, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to spend many days in our capital up in Ottawa, talking to politicians at various levels. And for the most part, I find that the individual politicians are very supportive. They're like, of course, that totally makes sense. We should do that. It's for the animals. I can't believe that's not already a law. But then trying to get the actual change in place, well, heck, if I'd managed to do that, I'd be the star of this whole panel. And so the other avenue to explore, of course, is if citizens had the legal availability to access cannabis products, there's nothing that stops them from giving it to their pet. And so then the argument really falls with the veterinary regulators in terms of stressing the importance that if pet parents are going to give cannabis anyway, it's of vital importance that they're getting the proper guidance, and that needs to come from their veterinary professional, who is us. And I think that that's really where we gained the most traction talking to our regulatory board, was framing it under, we need to have these discussions as part of harm reduction education. And that umbrella can encompass quite a broad range of topics, right down to which type of product and which dose to give, because that all becomes part of harm reduction education. They're going to do it anyway. It may be a step short of actual recommendation, and certainly it doesn't include dispensing or prescribing, but at least we're now able to give the information that's needed so that pet parents can do that as safely as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Any last closing remarks or comments from the panelists?
When do we get to do this again?
We'll start planning it right after this call. This was really wonderful, and yeah, there's so many more topics and information that can be shared between all of you experts. This has been just really wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for the thoughtful questions. Thank you for sharing your expertise and activism, and coming through here the hard way and really paving the road. So we're so grateful to all of you.
Well, thanks again for hosting us. I really, really appreciate this opportunity, Christine. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Likewise.
Thank you. Well, we'll definitely be in touch with each other and with the SCC membership and start planning another one and tackle some of the other topics that, that we could all benefit from listening to. So if anyone's curious to learn more about the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, you can read more at cannabisclinicians.org. We do have membership and we have educational training courses. And we're constantly developing new ones. We're offering as much free education and events that we can to really spread the word and make connections all over the world and build these bridges. So thank you so much again to CBD Pets Peru for offering the translation. That's been so fantastic to be able to make this accessible in 2 languages. So thank you so much. Check out CBD Pets Peru on Instagram, and I think we'll be collaborating with them more in the future to make education accessible. It's a huge mission of theirs as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Massive appreciation to all of you and wishing you a beautiful rest of your day.
Hey, Christine, can I just mention one thing? If anybody is interested in learning more about the Veterinary Cannabis Society, our website is vcs.pet. So just vcs.pet, super easy.
Y yo quisiera personalmente agradecer a la Society of Cannabis Clinicians nuevamente, ¿sí? Por tener la iniciativa de llamarnos a seguir educando, a seguir sensibilizando y a abrirnos nuevos canales a nosotros los médicos veterinarios que trabajamos en esto para poder seguirles diciendo, acá estamos y vamos a hacer. Muchas gracias.
Sí, ahí siempre me sumo después de vos, Santi, me sumo a tu agradecimiento, gracias por la invitación. La verdad que estar con Sara, con Patti, con Gary, Cristín, es una alegría al corazón. Agradecer Sara Silcox porque siempre estás presente y nos acompañás también aquí en Argentina, así que para nosotros es un placer. Santi, también compartir esto con vos, compañero también, así que muy amables por todos.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.